Right, listen, we've packed schedule. We want to get this wrapped up in 35 minutes. So we might kick this off and I'll just admit people as we go. So before we start, just want to welcome everyone and say good morning and thank you so much for joining today's webinar on Budget Smarter, Not Harder, how to prioritise your cybersecurity spend in the year ahead. So I'm Kirsten Savage-Lyons. I'm the head of marketing for Echo Enterprise and Security, and it's great to have you all here. So look, today's session is about stripping things back to what matters. So we're not here to confuse you with buzzwords. We're here to give you clear, practical advice on where you should spend your cybersecurity funds. So before, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Johnny and Paul, who are live and breathe in this cyber world. So take it away, Paul.
Yeah, good morning all. It's good to see people here on this webinar today. Look, I think we start with, this in some ways a little bit unusual for us. Normally we give these webinars to larger organizations because the kind of threats that we're seeing, we didn't see traditionally in SME and the SMB space, but that's actually been beginning to change and has been changing over the last number of years. So you can kind of see some of the numbers there, the increase in cybercrime affecting small businesses, more than 58% into 2024 were affected, and 70% of medium-sized businesses have experienced a cyber breach. And if we want to think back as to why is this happening, there are a couple of reasons. I think one of the main reasons is when you look at what the threat actors and the access to tools they had traditionally. You would have a threat actor would develop a tool and would target an organization and would try and do something there. Nowadays you have these affiliates, so you can have some very low level actors who can get access to these tools, run them as an affiliate, give some money back to the main organization or gang, and act in that way. And what that has done is that's pushed the target market down from enterprises and corporates and public sector down to the SME and SMB space. What does it mean? Well, it means that the world now is a much more scary place for people. The net effect of this is, if you're subject to attack and a breach, is you're going to suffer some downtime. There's going to be possibly some financial loss and reputational damage, and that's something that we see time and time again. There's a couple of other data points that are worth looking at. A number of years ago, when we would have talked about a thing called the dwell time. So what does that mean? That means if a threat actor has got access to your network, how long does it take them to do something nefarious? So I've got access in somehow. How long does it take to do something nefarious? It used to be in the regions of weeks and even months. If you look at the large HSC attack back in 2021, that was a matter of weeks before actual ransomware was deployed. Nowadays, we've seen, and particularly because SMEs and SMBs have a smaller range of services that can be targeted. The lowest attack or e-crime breakout time was something like 2 minutes. So that was 2 minutes between gaining initial access to being able to then go and do and exploit something internally, deploy ransomware, exfiltrate data, etc. So you can see the world's become a scary place. It's a scary place not just for large organizations, but for organizations of all sizes. So I think we've just a poll question. Kirsten, if you want to run that just to see, is this what people are experiencing?
Yes, let me just pull this up here now. The question is, what's keeping you up at night? And tick all that apply. Johnny, I think that last one is for you.
Yes, I like it. Okay, so we're seeing some of the results come in there. We just let that run for another couple of seconds. So, yeah, it seems to be well distributed across the kind of questions there. So we have ransomware about 26%, financial loss about 20%, loss of data about 23%. So yeah, I'm seeing it's a broad range of issues that are, I suppose, keeping people up at night. What we see is exactly that. And how those threats kind of manifest to our clients, what we're seeing is the first thing to note is that these attacks are more complex and cross, multiple security domains. So in the past, it might have been, well, I'm just worried about what happened on an endpoint, or I'm worried about firewall being breached, whatever it happens to be. Now attacks, what you need to worry about is your whole attack surface. So it's not just endpoints, it's what could be happening in email, what could be happening with your identities, what could be happening in your SaaS applications, how well is your data protected? And what about those range of cloud workloads as you've gone through that business and IT and OT transformation? And the net effect are these as you can see on the screen. Business email compromise, just to explain that briefly, it's where a threat actor can compromise an email or get in between an email chain and maybe do an invoice redirect to say change the banking details in an invoice and you might pay it fraudulently. Or it could be CEO impersonation, might say, look, can you transfer this money here? I need something transferred very quickly. There's one example of a golf club that I know about. They got a call from a supplier. I believe it was a supplier saying, look, I've sent you those golf buggies over. We haven't paid me yet. Look, here are my details. Can you go and pay me? And with nowadays with e-banking, I think happened in the car park. The treasurer got and transferred something like €18,000. Gone, never seen again, never tracked down. So it happens to organizations as small as a small little golf club, all the way up to I think a well-known one was Facebook and Google. There's a Lithuanian crime gang had in some ways extorted over 121 million. Now some of it was recovered, but you can see business email compromise, CEO impersonation, particularly nowadays with deep fake and Gen AI being used, is a key threat that's out there. There probably isn't a Friday evening that goes by or Saturday morning where we get a call into our SOC, our Security Operations Center, around I've been hit with ransomware. What do I do? So ransomware and human operated ransomware, effectively those affiliate gangs we talked about a second ago, is still a key threat that's out there. A lot of it doesn't get reported. A lot of it you don't get to see or hear about, but a lot of it's happening. And I'd say we probably have once a week where we get some organization will call us and help us with it. And that ransomware starts off as multiple extortions. It can be, have all your data locked up? Can you recover it? I've exfiltrated your data out, and I'm going to charge you a ransomware not to release it on the deep and dark web or whatever it happens to be. So that's what's keeping organizations of all sizes, and particularly SMEs and SMBs, up at night. Ransomware, key threat still. A business email compromise. Data exfiltration is key as well. It relates to and is sometimes done in conjunction with some of the other attacks. So that reflects very nicely what we've seen in the poll. What I think I'll do now is I just turn it over to Johnny and say, look, Johnny, what is it that organization can or should be doing to mitigate these attacks?
Great, thanks, Paul. Well, so thanks everyone. Essentially, I work most weeks with different organizations to understand, where they want to invest and how they need to spend their kind of hard-earned funds as a business to protect against the cyber threats. And essentially, it comes down to kind of three pillars of questions we get asked, and our customers are telling us that they are having to confirm to their board or senior management kind of three key things, like how could I be breached today? Can you detect if something's actually happening, and can I recover for the event of ransomware? And realistically, all of this is all linked to, the question that you kind of have to ask your board is, how long can you operate without your IT services, right? And essentially, when we get down to the specifics in some of this and we kind of explore, we look at the practical elements of where do you need to focus. And because most businesses wouldn't be able to survive that 24 days, as kind of Paul had in that first slide, if they've got hit with ransomware. So we just talked down to what do you need to have in place? And most of you here in this organization will have some of these controls, but where are your gaps is what we're trying to focus on today. So one, let's look at prevent, right? So if you look at your business email compromise as a key element of attack, you need strong email security controls in place to filter out that area. You need an endpoint detection and response capability, and this capability is essential to ensure that, you know, that if you get hit with ransomware, if a threat actor is on your have some way been able to infiltrate your devices, that you can detect that, and it generates alerts. And then a fundamental of all of this is around strong patch and vulnerability management and an integrated approach. And essentially in that area is trying to reduce that exposure that your business have, any potential footholds that if an attacker can utilize to move across your business if they get in, right? The second area that we kind of focus on, and in most cases, people are talking to you around your 24/7, 365 SOC, and that's that pillar around detect and respond. Can you detect today, you know, if an attacker is in your network? Can you detect if they've tried to get into your network and the preventive controls have actually done their job and stopped? So essentially, that's a key kind of component of investment in that area. And in that investment, you need to, the provider will ensure that one, they're monitoring it 24/7 and they can take the necessary actions. When we look at threat intelligence in this area, you know, I'll kind of explore in a little bit more kind of the different types of threat intelligence. But for now, realistically, one of the key elements is around identity-based attacks. You know, it's a huge attack vector at the moment. Someone has gained access to someone's credentials and utilizing that to breach your organization. So we're seeing a key focus on identity-based threat intelligence being a huge driver to be able to detect if you are vulnerable in a specific area. And then incident response. And there's different flavors of this, but essentially when all goes wrong, who can you call to be able to support you? Have you the plans in place? And then finally, look, it's inevitable at some cases that you can potentially be compromised. So have you your data? Do you have your crown jewels? Do you know how to get back up and running in this case? Can we isolate and ensure that your organization, if you are hit by a threat actor, that you can respond? Right. So that's just a kind of a viewpoint on the key pillars of how to address that risk. And many of you today will have some of these controls in place, but we'll go through more shortly. And again, just another quick poll in that area. So go ahead, Kirsten.
So the question is, which area of cybersecurity risk management do you feel your organization is currently the weakest in? So it's preventing attacks, detecting, responding, recovering, or maybe you're just not sure.
Okay, we're getting some, we're waiting another minute for more answers, but essentially what we're trying to see here is a large kind of proportion is around not 100% sure. And I think, okay, that's a really interesting point in that area, because look, we'll explore that a little bit more. But as kind of predicted in this area, we would have expected at some case that, you know, the people have the prevention controls in place, but it's the respond and recover, right? So let's take that forward, right? I think it's a really interesting one because this is what I get asked quite a lot when you actually come to a customer and go, where are my gaps? Where should I invest in? And essentially the first thing I typically ask, and I think this is where we get down to the specifics of where to invest, is what does your current IT service provide today? Because they provide levels of that. So you don't have to go out and invest into all of a security service that does everything. You might actually have a lot in your IT service. So for example, look, your IT services in general would configure your email security. They'll implement an EDR solution. They will provide security patching, provide data backup and incident management. But look, from a security professional, and I really focus on that, there's potential gaps in some of them services. And this can be mitigated pretty easily, but it's just from an organization just to know, you know, what do you cover today? What's in your scope of your IT service? So in general, most IT services configure and do checks on your email security against best practice on a regular basis. But a gap that we see quite often, and the next one is around you are getting alerts on your EDR, but it's not been monitored 24/7. So therefore, you know, that alert won't be seen out of hours. And I think as Paul said earlier on, is that customers and attacks are typically like Friday evening, weekends, when you have the least amount of coverage. So you want to ensure that you have that gap covered by someone is monitoring, detecting, and can respond on your behalf to isolate a device or block a user. Another area is around application based patching. In general, if you kind of invest into vulnerability management, it's going to give you a large amount of additional patches that are exposures that you maybe weren't aware of, right? And look, that's just a traditional element that we see everywhere. And then we just need to ensure that the full holistic patching is covered, from operation system to firewall to infrastructure, etc. And even some cases where you have a vulnerability management solution, it'll pick up vulnerabilities even on printers, right? And then look, the elements around it, just have you done recovery tests? Do you know what you will do in the event of an attack? And I think we'll kind of have a discussion towards the end around what has happened in the UK with Marks and Spencers and the co-op, because it's really interesting, and we'll talk to it towards the end, is around how Marks and Spencer reacted versus how the co-op reacted to a cyber attack and the different outcomes that they've had. So look, there are some of the elements that I noticed straight away when we support customers to understand what their gaps are and where they need to invest. As I move forward here and kind of explore the wider services that Echo provide, and I put this slide up here in front of you for a reason, right? Because on the right-hand side is what we deliver as individual services to our enterprise customers, right? Each of them have a unique service offering. They deliver a specific set of outcomes. But essentially what the feedback we get from our customers is there's a lot of services when we discuss this one, a lot of services there. They probably cost a lot of money. Where do I prioritize? What do they do for me and what do I spend? So I wanted to be able to address that and deep dive into some of this and explain from a small business, what do you need to look at in the next couple of slides. Firstly, let's look at what the purpose of our solutions are in general. Our solutions are there as you can see here in purple. You want to understand and know your attack surface to threats. And we have 3 key service lines in place and where people can invest in. And the first one is around attack surface management. And this service is directly linked to understanding how an attacker can see you today from the internet. How would they attack you? So what do you look like from the internet? It does a discovery exercise, it builds a picture of your organization, it does an external scan, and then it also does automatic testing of your environment 24/7, so that if you have any misconfigurations that an attacker would try to breach you, it will pick that up. So that's one key component. The next one is around cyber threat intelligence. In general, we see investment in cyber threat intelligence happens for customers who are very concerned about their brand, but there's also components within that area around identity, which is a great supplement to your standard service, so that for a smaller organization, in the event that one of your users have been compromised, you can pick up this. Going forward, then we look at vulnerability management, and in general, the vulnerability management is just going to scan your environment to understand what potentially weakness you can that you have, and inform your patching team on how to remediate them. So that's the first viewpoint in terms of knowing your attack services and services. The next one, which I won't jump into in too much detail, because we find that most of your IT providers will have levels of this service. So for small, medium enterprises, these 3 services are typically bolted into the IT service: a managed firewall, managed network, so managing your switches, your routers, your access points, so on and so forth, and then managed patching. But for enterprise customers, typically these are bespoke services on their own and delivered differently. But that's for a small, medium enterprise. If I'm talking about investment in that area, you more than likely don't need to look at this, and it's understanding what your IT service provider provide in the first place. And then finally, the last kind of element is around the managed detection and response. So detecting if a threat is in your environment and responding to it. So in that scenario, you need to have a 24/7 SOC who manage not only your endpoints, but your identities, your infrastructure, your network data, and then has the capability to be able to respond. So we've service lines that support that. And why I wanted to go through that is that over the last year or 2, I've been working with organizations of all scale and sizes. And what we found is, especially for our small, medium enterprises, that there's quite a lot of services here. And they're all, when you're bought individually, can kind of be quite expensive and not in line with what they have from a budget perspective to address their risks. And I think that's kind of a good segue for me to kind of to pass over to Paul, who's going to discuss around our Cyber Defence Complete offering that takes some key components within our wider services, that takes the best elements out of each that's needed to address the risk, but provides it at a kind of a fit for purpose solution for small, medium enterprises.
Thanks, Johnny. That's a great segue there. Look, before I move on to this, I'll just ask you one question. Maybe just keep it a bit interactive. If we were to do one thing for an SME, there's lots of services that we can do. What would the one thing we should do? Would it be identity? Would it be endpoint? Would it be vulnerability management? Where would the one place you'd start be? Sorry, you might have an issue there with Johnny's audio. Yeah, so look, why don't we introduce people to Cyber Defence Complete? I think we've shown what the world is like. It's a scary place. We've shown the blueprint for what it should be to fix it in terms of what you need to address in terms of being able to identify what's out there, protect yourself, detect and respond and recover. So Cyber Defence Complete, it's like enterprise grade securities for SMEs and SMBs. So what do we mean by enterprise grade security? It's backed by technologies and vendors who are top right Gartner Magic Quadrant. They're not small little niche players that are aimed at the MSP market. We're using top right Gartner Magic Quadrant providers to provide this Cyber Defence Complete package. So it answers a number of questions. The first question it answers, I think in the second poll that Kirsten put up there was, what area of cybersecurity risk management do you feel you're weakest in? And the kind of key response to that was, we're not sure. So it helps give surety in some ways. So how does it do that? Well, first of all, if you look at what is it that you need to look, what is it that you look like to attackers? Okay, so am I the only guy in the street that doesn't have an alarm box up, so the robber's going to come in and try and attack my house? So the first piece, the vulnerability assessment piece and the attack surface management piece, gives you a view, and we will give you a view of what your external attack surface looks like and what your internal surface looks like. So then you can put in those preventative and corrective technologies to make you less viable for attack. So that's the first piece of it. That's kind of key. Layered on top of that will be then, if it's internal devices, to do patch management on top of it. Sometimes that's done as part of the MSP service, but if not, it can be integrated with the vulnerability assessment. So now we're helping you to bolster up what your attack surface looks like. The next piece is, if you think of we did talk earlier about the multi-domain, the multiple security domains being attacked. So if you take the kind of key place and where I was leading with this is the endpoint. So why are endpoints important? When malware sits on the endpoint, ransomware sits on the endpoint, but also endpoints are used to traverse across the network. So traditionally, and you may have at this point in time an endpoint protection platform in place, which protects you against traditional threats. But really, to look at the advanced threats that we're seeing nowadays, you need to have more than that. You need not to have just protection, but detect and respond. So what does that mean? It's a solution that picks up where protection might fail. It's more behavioral based. So it looks at what your machine is doing or what the software is doing, and trying to make a determination, is that something that's nefarious or not. And then you have a security operations center that looks at it. So that's the second piece. The third area, which is key, is identity. As I said, with that IT and business transformation, a lot of people will have cloud identities, whether it's Entra ID or whether it's other kind of cloud providers. Identity is the kind of one of the first places that gets targeted. I think it was one of the CISOs of Microsoft said a number of years ago, attackers don't crack in or hack in anymore, they just log in. So they get compromised accounts by compromising identities, either through social engineering or buying them on the dark and deep web. They compromise accounts and use some of that compromised account data then as they go further through attacks. So in the Cyber Defence Complete, there is that threat intelligence piece that monitors what's happening on the identity piece, as well as the endpoint detect and respond. We also talked earlier about that it's a big holistic picture. It's not just endpoints, it's not just identities, it's what's happening in your SaaS applications, what's happening on your networks, what's happening with your data and where it's stored. And that's where you have that managed extended detect and respond. So that's it. I'm not just looking at one aspect of your security domain, I'm looking at all aspects together. I'm taking them all into a security operations center. I'm looking at the various signals, and then I'm making a determination on what to do about it. So what we have done, and we've packaged it up really nicely, is Cyber Defense Complete, has all those elements in it. It's built and backed with the best technologies in there and the best control sets that we can put in place. It's sized and priced appropriately for SMEs. It's very simple to understand. It's priced either on a per user or per device basis, depending on the various kind of modules. And it's something that we see bring that enterprise grade security with enterprise grade products and controls and technologies down to the SME and SMB space. It's backed, of course, by a 24/7 security operations center, something that a lot of organizations of any size would find it very, very difficult to do. And at that price point, as we said, that makes it very affordable to give that enterprise grade security for SMEs.
Paul, just I thought you were asking everyone the question, so hence why I stayed quiet, right? But to answer your question, just I think in line with what we're like the element here around like budgeting and where to prioritize investment, right? So let's look at the 3 levels of attacks that we talked about back then. You need to do, one is around business email compromise, the second is around essentially phishing, and the third is around ransomware. So if we talk about preventive controls firstly, so start by ensuring that you have an EDR solution in place. And I'm assuming that most people have that in place. That's specifically around your ransomware, right? The second piece is you have an email security solution in today. Just do checks on it to make sure that the configuration is in line with your risk profile, so you can heighten the level of spam that can come in. So that's a good way of preventing business email compromise by potentially reducing what can come in, right? That's the smarter way without a huge amount of investment. And the third one is security awareness is essential to reduce the risk from phishing. So these are ones that you probably have in place, but really put a focus on it. Once you have them 3 pillars in place already, then you need to look at your detect and respond. And that's where this fits in here, right? So, you need a package to make sure that you're not just preventing, but you're able to detect and respond, right? They're key elements. And look, and I might just explain the story while we're here right now around Marks and Spencer's and the co-op, right? I found it really interesting because it kind of segues onto that. So if you look at Marks and Spencer's, they've been out of action and essentially unoperating for the last number of weeks due to the ransomware attack. It's all over the news. But actually, if you look at the same time, the same attacker looked at different retail chains, and it also affected the co-op. And if you look at some of the news from the BBC, it actually says that the attackers were unhappy and how they weren't able to breach the co-op to the same extent as they did Marks and Spencer's. And the reason why is that the co-op initiated an incident response plan. And essentially, they took their services off the network quicker. So they essentially limited the damage that the attacker could do, right? So the point of that element, which I find fascinating, is that, when we talk to our customers, like, what do you do if you're attacked? Time is of the essence in the scenario. And if you haven't a plan in place, so you haven't discussed it with your management, for example, you've just been hit by ransomware, someone has popped up and there's an alert. Your SOC is recommending that you take your whole business offline with immediate effect. It's going to have a full impact on you, on your customers. It's going to have a full impact on your service. It's going to affect the bottom line. Are you willing to make that call, or is it going to take you hours to make that call with your executive leadership? If you have not had this discussion in advance, you will not know the answer, and time is of the essence. So that's why the importance of incident response planning is very critical here. And look, it's quite simple. You just go through a scenario, explain this, explain your choices, and explain the impacts with your board and your executive team, and then you agree what is your position. So that's a key element there. So look, I think just before we go to questions, and for anyone here on the call, and I think it aligns really well with the kind of questions about not knowing your gaps. Look, we put together a rapid risk assessment, right? And for anyone who's interested in helping us interested in help, we will offer this as a value add for anyone who attended. It's not a full maturity assessment, but its element will be to be able to support anyone who's interested to identify the current risks by asking a series of questions. So we'll ask you questions around your posture, what you have today, what you're missing. So we'll do an interview style questionnaire and provide a prioritized output linked to what potential operational risk that you as a business hold. And the purpose of this will be to help inform you as IT leaders or as executives around the risks that your business holds today by not having the right investment. We find this as a significant kind of lever to be able to get more budget, right? And essentially, when we work with organizations who have breached, budget becomes available where it didn't become before because the consequences are known. So this will essentially give you a condensed report for IT management or executive management to provide a business case for investment and outlining the potential risks that that business have to sign up to. So if you look at NIS2, NIS2 as a requirement has risk management as a key pillar for anyone who's under NIS2, and therefore something like this, even if it's not into this full detail of NIS2, will allow you to provide risk-based kind of reporting back to your board to say, I've made you aware. These are the risks we hold, and this is what could potentially happen. And look, and that's how essentially every organization gets investment. So from a budget perspective, do as much as you can now, make sure that we pass up the risk and we can support here as value add. So I think that's that. And
Brilliant.
the last slide.
Thank you very much, lads. You actually answered a couple of questions that have already been submitted beforehand. But if anyone does have any question, we're going to run for another couple of minutes if you want to pop something in. But a couple came in before this. So, well, actually, I'm going to ask you something that maybe this is a curveball because this is something I wondered. Is what percentage, or is there a percentage of your IT budget that you should put towards cybersecurity spend? Or is it one of those, as long as a piece of string?
Yeah, it is kind of one of those, but I mean, there are good metrics around what proportion of your budget your IT spend should be, and it can be up around 5%, and then what percentage of that 5% goes on cybersecurity. So I think it's at least going to be 10% of that number as well. But it's a difficult one to answer. It depends on the organization, depends on the controls and technologies in place and how it's set up for business. But without those are kind of rough numbers for it. If you're thinking of it another way, per employee, what should you be spending on cybersecurity? So for something like the Cyber Defense Complete that we talked about, probably somewhere between 5 and 15 euro per user per month, all in, not just on Cyber Defense Complete, but on some of the other controls and technologies. And that kind of scales down to 20-person organizations up to larger organizations. So if you worked off that you're spending that amount on that range of controls and technologies, from identify to protect, detect, and respond, between 5 and about 15 euro per user/device per month.
And I think, Kirsten, if you just kind of took that question, there typically that 10% is linked to the operational spend, right? So if someone doesn't have this today, there is a little bit of capital upfront investment in terms of CapEx that needs to be put in place, right? So it takes some time to kind of tease out how you would respond to an incident, document the approaches, like all of these. If you to say, for example, if you had to implement policies, procedures, you don't have them already and you require them as part of a wider program, like this takes time and effort. And typically what Paul is talking around is the operational spend, but then you have to put budget aside to be able to uplift your maturity to be able to address some of the risks.
Okay, that answers that. A question from Steve: how do we get board level buy-in for increased security spend? Any tips?
Well, there's two ways, right? And look, there's you can use the back of the fag packet analogy, right? Firstly, so you can do full maturity assessments, right? And I've seen them before, and I've done them, and I've sat down with boards, and sometimes the full maturity assessment will tell you all your problems, and it's so it's really important to do, but in general, board level just want something condensed, right? So the first element is to ask that question and really enforce the question. Provide them, ask them for buy-in now. Ask them decision to say, how many days can we run as a business without IT? Right. So how much would we lose as a business if we were down for 24 days? It's an education piece, firstly. That's what I'm talking about. This is education. You have to bring them to the scenario going, for 24 days, it's the average time for ransomware. Can we survive 24 days? And they were
Yeah,
like,
that's interesting, Johnny. I mean, Kirsten, it's a great question to ask, and in some ways there's two answers. If you have a breach, budgets free up very quickly, and we have had organizations where we've tried to evangelize a more mature security posture, and they wouldn't have done it, and have had a breach, and lo and behold, the purse strings open up dramatically. So yeah, how do you get that? So what you need to do is get to that point before that point happens. So really, what a business is going to understand is business risk, not cyber risk. So you need to translate somehow cyber risk into business risk, as Johnny's has just kind of gone through there. It's reputational damage. It's going to be regulatory damage like GDPR and NIS2 or DORA if you happen to be subject to those. The operational disruption. How long can your business go on without being affected by it? And then an overall financial loss. I think if you look at the Marks and Spencer's one, I know they're not an SME, but I think they have predicted it's going to cost them about 300 million in profits reduced and wiped off about a billion off their market cap. So you take that then, and then can you show a return on your security investment? So if you take those figures in and say, here's the financial impact of what could happen if we don't do this, and then here's the investment and how it's going to mitigate those. Like anything, there's to get 100% cybersecurity is not achievable. There needs to be an appropriate spend. But if you take the zero trust world we live in, it lives in what we call this assumed breach. So you assume that something's going to happen, and you want to be able to detect and respond to that a whole lot quicker. So to make that pain a little bit less. Yeah.
Okay,
look,
that makes sense.
yeah, and I think just it gets our interest. We can help frame some of that together, right? And
Yeah, I imagine
it
there's a
doesn't
risk
have to be
assessment.
it doesn't have to be upfront today, right? This can be a multi kind of year approach where you target off which pieces you want, which piece of the pie you want to start at first, but like knocking off the risks. So which risk? Here's the list of all the risks. Which ones are we willing to accept at the moment? We don't have the budget for that, so we can accept that, right? But these are the ones we need to focus on now, and then it's just a get their investment, but then provide a risk mitigation plan. And as Paul said, it's a business risk mitigation plan. It's not, it is linked to IT, but it's all around business viability to keep the business operating. If we don't do this, this could affect the business. And I think get back to their language, right? Is like,
Yeah.
get back to
And that's what this risk assessment you're offering would, I assume, do, and it would give cost or estimated costs.
estimated costs.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So if you could then ask someone listening today to leave with one piece of information they should just take away, what would that be?
Like, there is a lot of work that you need to do here from a cyber perspective, right? So let's start just taking them off little by little, and is essentially in terms of closing the risks. But start by know your problems, write them down, and then prioritize with your management or whoever is needed on how we're going to address them. Because the key element is there's nothing worse than you not sleeping at night. You need to ensure like you don't make the decisions on the budget. If you're in an IT, if you're part here and you're in the IT side of the house, you have to ask for approval for the budget. So help frame that question to upper management and then put a plan to execute it, right? And it doesn't all have to happen overnight, but that's the best bit of advice. Just plan for what you need to do, so therefore at least you can say, we knew we had the risk. We've taken steps to mitigate it. The business all decided, rather than if something happened, going, why did this happen? Right? We know why it happened.
Where do we
right?
begin?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Paul?
Paul,
Yeah,
anything?
yeah. So you said a second ago, cybersecurity is not an IT issue; it's a business issue. I think Johnny just reiterated that. So I think takeaway would be have a look at what cyber defense complete is. Um, See, do you understand where your gaps are? Johnny had a good slide there on difference between IT and security, and there's some overlap. See where your gaps are, and see is it a good fit for it, and come and talk to us if you think there's something we can do with you.
Super. Okay, I think we might leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, everyone who's joined. I'll be in touch with the recording, the slides, but feel free to reach out to me if you want to get ahead of that, and we can get back in touch with you. But in the meantime, have a great day.